There's a silent war happening, not on the outside, but inside your energy. You may not see it with your eyes, but you can feel it. When you're around a certain person, your nervous system activates, your thoughts scramble, your emotions twist into knots. They smile, but it's hollow. They flatter, but it's strategic. And deep inside, you know you're being pulled into a game where your heart is the prize. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about why narcissists fear the emotionally unavailable. Because when you stop feeding them what they crave, tension, validation, control, they don't just walk away, they panic. Why? Because your lack of emotional accessibility represents something they cannot manipulate. Self-possession. Narcissiscs. Survive by tapping into your emotional field. They feed off your reactions, your openness, your vulnerability, especially if it's unconscious. They aren't drawn to your pain. They're drawn to your availability. Not the kind that comes from authentic love. It's the kind that comes from unhealed wounds. The kind that comes from seeking approval. The kind that makes you explain yourself. Prove yourself over give and second-guess. To them, your heart is a power source. The more emotionally available you are without boundaries, the more they plug in and siphon off your energy. But the moment you become emotionally unavailable, not cold, not numb, but regulated, they start to lose their grip. They don't understand this language of detachment. They only understand intensity, ups and downs, guilt and reward, push and pull. When you stop responding that way, you become unpredictable. And for a narcissist, unpredictability means danger. You see, a narcissist thrives in patterns. Their control isn't accidentally, it's neurological. They test your boundaries over and over, waiting for you to fold. They say something cruel, then something sweet. They withdraw, then reappear. It's all calculated to keep your emotional system on edge, to keep you in survival mode. But when you regulate yourself, when you stop reacting, you interrupt their feedback loop. You confuse their programming. You shift the game. Now, they're faced with a new reality. They can no longer control how you feel, and that terrifies them. Narcissists are not interested in love. They're interested in power dressed as love. They don't want your connection. They want your compliance. But the emotionally unavailable person, someone who has healed, who has rewired their emotional triggers, no longer lives in the frequencies of guilt, shame, and fear. They live in self-respect, in energetic clarity. They can feel manipulation without absorbing it. They can observe charm without being seduced by it. To someone who feeds on emotional instability, that's unbearable. You become a closed circuit. They can't find a hook. And when they can't control you, they discard you or they escalate. But this is not a sign of your weakness. This is a sign that your energy is finally aligned with your worth. The emotionally unavailable are not always broken. Sometimes they are deeply self-contained, not cold but clear, not numbed, discerning. They know how to sit with their discomfort without outsourcing it. They don't rush to fix, rescue, or appease. They pause, they observe. They breathe. This internal regulation dismantles the narcissist's illusion, because narcissists cannot exist in systems of stillness. They need movement, emotion, chaos, reaction. Stillness exposes them. Detachment disempowers them. Silence becomes your sword, and when you refuse to energetically collapse, they are forced to confront the void of their own disconnection. There's something powerful that happens when you no longer need to be understood, when you no longer feel the need to chase closure, to justify your intuition, or to soften your boundaries for the sake of someone else's comfort. That is when you begin to rise. Not in a loud, visible way, but in a quiet, vibrational way that shifts the entire dynamic of the relationship. You move from reactive to responsive, from dependent to sovereign, from overexposed to protected by presence. Narcissists fear this transformation because it reveals something they've long hidden. They have no power outside of what you give them. And when you stop giving, their mask begins to crack. Let me ask you, how many times have you traded your peace for their validation? How many times have you opened your heart to someone who only wanted to control it? How many times have you called it love when it was only dependency? Now imagine this. You, standing in your power, not proving, not chasing, not justifying, just present. Calm, silent, your nervous system steady, your energy clean. This is what freedom feels like. So if you are someone who has struggled with emotional entanglement, if you've been caught in cycles of manipulation, guilt, or confusion, let this be your awakening. You do not need to become someone else to be worthy. You do not need to play emotional chess to be respected. You only need to return to yourself. And when you do, when you reclaim your energetic boundary, you become emotionally unavailable to manipulation, but emotionally available to truth. You don't just protect yourself. You reprogram the entire field. You become the pattern breaker, quiet force, the healed nervous system that no longer fuels the cycle. That is the person the narcissist fears, not because you hurt them, but because you no longer feed them. And in that moment, their illusion dies, and your truth begins. Asterisk, there is a deeper truth that most people never recognize, and it governs nearly every toxic connection they've ever had. Narcissists do not just manipulate with words or actions. They manipulate through energy. They thrive on your attention, your emotion, your reactions, because all of these are forms of energy. They survive through energetic dependency. And the moment you begin to break free from that dependency, they begin to feel threatened. The human energy field is measurable, powerful, and incredibly sensitive. We're broadcasting frequencies at every moment based on our thoughts, our emotions, and our beliefs. When you're operating from a wounded place, seeking validation, over-explaining yourself, needing approval, you're emitting a frequency of lack, of vulnerability, of openness, not grounded in power, but in survival. Narcissists are incredibly attuned to these frequencies, not because they are spiritual, but because their survival depends on sensing who is energetically available. To feed them, in this dynamic, you are not seen as a whole person. You are seen as a resource, a battery. And the more open your emotional field is, especially when it's unguarded by consciousness, the more they will attach themselves to you, not to love you, but to extract from you. This isn't always obvious. It's not always loud. It starts subtly, a compliment, a deep conversation, a bond that feels instant. What's actually happening is an energetic hook is being set. They're testing how much you're willing to give, not in material things, but in emotional access. Now let's talk about emotional availability. In healthy relationships, emotional availability is a beautiful thing. It creates trust, connection, intimacy. But in trauma-based patterns, emotional availability becomes a weakness when it's given without discernment. When you're open to everyone, when you overshare to feel close, when you overgive to be loved, you're sending a signal. I am open. I am unguarded. I'm accessible. That's exactly what a narcissist is drawn to. They aren't looking for love. They're looking for emotional supply. For someone who will reflect their ego back to them, who will give endlessly without questioning, who will take blame just to keep the peace. And when you are deeply emotionally available without boundaries, you become the perfect target. Absorb their moods. You carry their projections. You begin to shape your energy to fit their needs. And all the while, you're being drained. Not physically, energetically. You feel it in your body. Tension, fatigue, confusion. You start to question your intuition. Your nervous system goes into fight, flight, and you don't know why. What's happening is your energy is no longer your own. It's being directed, shaped, and manipulated by someone who does not want connection. They want control. And this is where awareness becomes everything. Because once you see the pattern, once you understand that your energy is being harvested, you begin to reclaim it. And that's when things start to shift. The narcissist senses when you begin to close the energetic gap, when you stop reacting, when you stop explaining, when you stop seeking closeness at the expense of your peace. And that's when they panic, because they are losing the very thing that sustained the relationship, your emotional energy. They fear your stillness, your neutrality, your detachment, because it starves the cycle they've depended on. This is not about punishing them. This is about healing you. You begin to notice how often you've overextended yourself just to keep someone close. You see the times you silenced your needs so they wouldn't leave? You recognize how you allowed your frequency to drop just to make someone else comfortable. And in that recognition, you take your power back. You stop being the source for someone who refuses to source themselves. Stop feeding a system that only survives through your unconscious participation. This is what it means to move from victimhood to sovereignty. From being energetically porous to becoming energetically sovereign. It doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop leaking. You stop broadcasting lack. You stop needing someone else to regulate your sense of worth. And the more you regulate your inner world, the less reactive you become to the external. The narcissist can no longer control you with silence or anger or praise. Stop dancing with the pattern. They may escalate. They may pull away. They may try to guilt you back into the role you once played. But you're different now. You're no longer hooked into their game because you've changed the only thing that ever mattered in that dynamic. Your energy. When your energy no longer aligns with dependency, manipulation cannot survive. So the truth is this. Narcissists fear the emotionally unavailable, not because they're unkind, but because they're untouchable. Not because they're cold, but because they're self-contained. Not because they don't feel, but because they don't leak. When you reach that state when your energy becomes your on-you, don't just protect yourself. You transform the field. You break the cycle. You become someone who can no longer be used as fuel for someone else's illusion. When in that moment, you return home to yourself. Most people don't realize that their emotional availability is more than just a personality trait. It's a frequency, a signature signal you're broadcasting every single day through your thoughts, your beliefs, and your nervous system. Emotional availability is energetic availability. And when you have not yet healed the wounds that keep you needing to be needed, needing to be validated, needing to be seen in order to feel safe, then your emotional availability becomes a currency that others, especially narcissists, know how to spend. You might think you're being compassionate. You might think you're just open-hearted, loyal, forgiving. But what's really happening beneath the surface is that you are emotionally exposed. You've left the gates wide open, not just to love, but to exploitation. You're giving without boundaries, listening without discernment, merging with people who haven't earned your trust. And it's all because somewhere in your subconscious, you've equated giving yourself away with being loved. A narcissist thrives on that kind of emotional exposure. It's their entry point. It gives them access to you, not through physical control, but through psychological influence. It gives them permission to shape your identity, because the more emotionally available you are without inner clarity, the more you become a mirror for their projections. You start to reflect their greatness when they feel superior. You reflect their wounds when they need someone to blame. And you reflect their emptiness when they want to feel whole. And the more you take that on, the more they see you not as a person, but as a projection screen. At first, it doesn't look like manipulation. It looks like intensity. It looks like passion. It looks like a magnetic pull. You feel seen, needed, wanted. But over time, that energy begins to shift. They start to withdraw when you need connection. They explode when you express boundaries. They flatter you when they need something, then criticize you when you express your truth. And each time, you offer more. You explain yourself. You forgive. Too quickly, you try to prove your value. You believe that if you can just love them hard enough, they'll finally be safe to love. But this is the trap. Your emotional availability is being used as emotional supply, not for intimacy, for control. Every reaction, every confession, every vulnerability becomes data information they will later use to manipulate your reality. They learn what triggers you, what soothes you, what makes you afraid of losing them. And because you've built connection on your emotional exposure rather than mutual emotional maturity, you become easier and easier to manipulate. The moment you start to recognize this pattern is the moment you awaken. You realize that what you've been calling love is actually energetic enmeshment. What you thought was a soulmate was actually a teacher, showing you how often you give away your power just to feel chosen. Oh mate, that realization stings. It shakes the identity you've built around being the giver, the healer, the one who understands. But it also liberates you, because now you can make a different choice. When you begin to pull your energy back, when you become less emotionally available in a chaotic way and more emotionally attuned to yourself, you start disrupting their supply chain. You no longer answer the phone at midnight to fix their drama. You no longer rush to apologize when they twist your words. You no longer try to decode their silences or chase after their approval. You sit with yourself instead. You feel the discomfort. You listen to your intuition. You rewire your nervous system to know that stillness is not abandonment, that your worth doesn't live in their gaze. This is where emotional sovereignty begins. You start to give from a place of overflow rather than emptiness. You start to listen with discernment rather than obligation. Start to say no without guilt and yes without fear. And slowly, the version of you who gave everything just to be chosen fades away. In her place is someone grounded, present, whole, and that shift terrifies the narcissist. Not because you've become mean or cold, but because you've become unavailable to the old game. You're no longer reactive. You're responsive. You're no longer over-explaining. You're simply stating your truth. You're no longer bending to avoid their anger. You're standing firm in your boundaries, and that throws off everything they once relied on to keep control. When you change your energy, you change the relationship. And when the dynamic changes, it reveals who was actually invested in connection and who was invested in control. Often, you'll find that the narcissist will either escalate their behavior in an attempt to pull you back into the cycle or retreat completely because they can't access the version of you they used to know. Either way, you win, not because you've beaten them, but because you've awakened, because you've remembered who you were before you began shaping your identity around someone else's approval, because you've finally made your own emotional state your priority and stopped outsourcing your safety to unpredictable people. This is where you begin to rebuild, not from trauma, from truth. You begin to realize that emotional availability is sacred, but it is not meant to be scattered. It is meant to be shared with people who are capable of holding space for your soul, not just consuming your energy. You learn to pause before opening your heart. You ask if the other person is emotionally literate, if they take responsibility for their own pain, if they are capable of mutual regulation instead of projection. That's the new pattern. That's the higher frequency. It's not about closing your heart. It's about choosing where your heart is safe to open. That's what breaks the cycle. That's what ends the addiction to chaos. That's what sets you free from people who only know how to take. And when you finally arrive in that space, you feel a power you may have never felt before. Not the power of control, the power of clarity. The power of presence. The power of knowing that your emotions are no longer a tool for someone else's survival. They are your guidance system, your truth, your light, and now that you've reclaimed them, there's no going back. Asterisk, there is something deeply powerful about emotional unavailability. When it is rooted in conscious self-regulation. When a person learns how to hold their energy, how to remain centered in the face of manipulation, how to no longer play the emotional games that once kept them addicted to chaos, they create a disruption that narcissists cannot understand. Guess what? The narcissist needs more than anything else is control. And control cannot survive in the presence of neutrality. Control only survives where there is reaction. A narcissist's entire emotional strategy is built around one thing: predictability. They may appear spontaneous, unpredictable, even chaotic on the surface, but underneath, they are following a deeply programmed loop. That loop depends on you reacting the way you always have, depends on you feeling guilty when they're disappointed. It depends on you apologizing when they're angry. It depends on you trying to fix things every time they withdraw. And the moment you stop participating in that loop, you dismantle the very foundation of the relationship. When you become emotionally unavailable, not in the sense of being closed off or numb, but in the sense of being emotionally self-governed, you send a signal to their system. This energy is no longer accessible. That's terrifying to someone who survives on emotional access. Suddenly their usual tactics don't work. You don't rise when they provoke you. You don't collapse when they pull away. You don't beg for answers when they ghost. You don't try to explain your worth through long texts, late-night calls, or emotional breakdowns. You simply stay present with yourself, and that stillness breaks the pattern. You see, narcissists depend on emotional imbalance. Their power comes from keeping you unstable, always reaching for connection that never fully arrives, always questioning if you're good enough, always chasing a version of the relationship that existed only in the beginning. That instability creates emotional hunger. It weakens your intuition. It overrides your nervous system. And as long as you remain in that state, you're easier to manipulate. But something profound happens when you learn to sit with your own discomfort, when you stop externalizing your inner pain, when you stop needing their validation to feel whole. You begin to close the loop. You start to rewire your brain. The old emotional programs, those habits of needing, proving, fixing, begin to fall apart, and the narcissist senses it. They sense that you're no longer feeding the dynamic. They sense the collapse of control. They don't know what to do with it. Their identity is tied to how much power they can have over others. If they cannot dominate your emotional field, they feel irrelevant. And that is their deepest fear. Not rejection, not even exposure, but irrelevance. Your detachment shows them a mirror of their own emptiness. Because in the absence of your emotional reaction, they are left alone with themselves. What they see there, they do not want to face. So they may try harder. They may escalate. They may shift tactics. They may return with sweetness, with apology, with the fantasy version of themselves you first fell for. But if your awareness is intact, if your energy is no longer on autopilot, you won't fall for it. Not because you're bitter. Because you've done the inner work to understand your own triggers, to trace your wounds back to their origin, and to release the belief that love has to hurt in order to feel real. What most people don't realize is that our emotional patterns are memorized in the body. Every time you react in the same way, you reinforce a loop. You reinforce the idea that your safety lies in getting someone else to change. But when you pause, when you breathe, when you choose a new response, you are literally changing your biology. You're creating a new neural pathway, a new chemical reaction, a new electromagnetic field around your body. And that field starts to attract something different. It's not just about rejecting the narcissist. It's about no longer being available for the frequency they represent. You're not playing hard to get. You're not trying to manipulate them back. You're not waiting for them to wake up. You've simply shifted your frequency. And in that frequency, their manipulation has nowhere to land. This is what it means to become unhooked. You still feel, you still love, but you are no longer controlled by the highs and lows of someone else's approval. You no longer mistake intensity for intimacy. You no longer mistake attention for affection. You begin to recognize real connection as something calm, grounded, and safe. And anything that doesn't match that no longer feels appealing. In fact, it begins to repel you. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It's a process. It's uncomfortable. You will grieve. You will doubt. Will be tempted to go back to the familiar chaos, because chaos once felt like home. But if you stay the course, if you continue choosing presence over performance, clarity over confusion, and stillness over emotional chaos, you will find something sacred, yourself. You will remember that love is not supposed to be a battlefield. That real love doesn't ask you to sacrifice your self-worth. That connection built on manipulation is not love, it's bondage. And you were never born to be bound. You were born to expand, to create, to live in alignment with the truth of who you are. So when the narcissist sees you becoming emotionally unavailable in this grounded, conscious, self-regulated way, they will feel fear not because you've hurt them, but because they can no longer reach you in the way they used to. They can't twist your emotions to gain power. They can't destabilize you to make themselves feel significant. And in that moment, they come face to face with the one thing they've been avoiding all along themselves. And you, no longer entangled, begin to rise, not above them, beyond them. You rise into the version of yourself that no longer needs the external to confirm the internal. You rise into a reality where your peace is not a performance, it's your baseline. You rise into wholeness, into coherence, to truth. And that is a reality no one can take from you. There's a moment in the healing journey when you stop focusing on fixing the people around you, and you begin to witness the real source of your freedom the moment. You realize that the only place you were ever truly imprisoned was in your own emotional response to others. Not because you were weak, not because you were foolish, but because your nervous system had been trained to survive. And in survival, you become reactive. You chase peace through external validation. You give your energy away just to feel safe. But when you finally learn how to sit in your own presence, unshaken, attached to someone else's approval or behavior, you enter a state that few people ever reach. You become still. And in that stillness, everything changes. The stillness I'm talking about isn't passive. It's not avoidance. It's not emotional shutdown. It is the most powerful form of energetic disruption, because narcissists don't know what to do with stillness. They're wired to seek reaction, to generate chaos, to dominate attention. But when you become emotionally self-contained, when your energy no longer moves at the pace of someone else's demands, you interrupt the entire dynamic. You begin to operate from a place that isn't reactive, but responsive. You begin to make decisions from a field of coherence, not from emotional confusion. That doesn't mean you stop feeling. In fact, you feel more. But now, you're aware of your emotions. You're not identified with them. You can feel the tension in a conversation without becoming the tension. You can notice manipulation without internalizing it. You observe without absorbing. This shift is subtle, but it is profound. You go from being a character in someone else's story to becoming the author of your own. You step out of the drama. You stop trying to rewrite their script. You stop auditioning for a role in their life that only serves to drain you. You reclaim your energy. And that reclamation sends a signal. It tells the world, and especially the people who once fed off your emotional openness, that access is no longer granted. Narcissists don't just fear rejection, they fear irrelevance. Irrelevance comes when they can no longer manipulate your perception of reality, when you no longer look to them to define your worth, to validate your choices, to give you a sense of belonging. And when you pull your energy back, not out of spite, but from awareness, you create a field around you that says, I belong to myself now. And here's what happens when you belong to yourself. You stop leaking energy into situations that aren't aligned with your healing. You stop participating in conversations that go nowhere. You stop explaining your boundaries. You stop overextending to be understood. You start moving from clarity, from purpose, from internal connection. And the more you do that, the less attractive chaos becomes. You start to crave peace over intensity, stillness over drama, truth over attention. This is what it means to live. From the inside out, you're no longer waiting for external permission to feel whole. You're creating coherence in your own field. And in that coherence, manipulation can't take root. Because manipulation only works when there's internal fragmentation. When you doubt your intuition, when you override your instincts, when you disconnect from your own emotional intelligence to maintain the illusion of connection with someone else. But once you are integrated, once your heart and mind and body are aligned, you stop confusing tension with chemistry. You stop interpreting emotional unavailability as mystery. Stop calling red flags spiritual lessons. Stop entertaining people who trigger your old identity just so you can prove you've healed. You no longer need to perform healing. You are healing. You are being. Being is your protection. There's something radical about showing up to conflict with presence instead of performance. When someone tries to provoke you, and you respond with clarity, not defensiveness. When someone tests your limits and you enforce them without guilt. When someone withholds affection and you don't collapse into self-blame, that's the power of stillness. It's not loud, it's not flashy, but it is disruptive. It reveals what the narcissist doesn't want to see. Their power over you was never real. It was borrowed from your need to be seen, and now you see yourself. You validate yourself. You choose yourself. Not because you're above love, but because You now know the difference between love and control. And anything that asks you to abandon yourself to stay connected is no longer love in your reality. It's a lesson that has expired, so you become quieter, not out of suppression, but out of wisdom. You speak less, but your presence says more. You do less, but your impact deepens. You interact with the world from a place of fullness, not from craving. And narcissists who are designed to hook into your emptiness can't find an entry point. You've become energetically immune, not because you've built walls, but because you've built a sanctuary within. That sanctuary becomes your new baseline. And from there, you draw new kinds of people, new experiences, new opportunities, ones that meet you in the same frequency, not chaos, not addiction, not control, but resonance, respect, and reciprocity. You no longer negotiate your value, you embody it. You no longer fear losing someone. You trust that what is meant for you won't require you to betray yourself to keep it. And when someone comes into your life now, you don't get swept away. In their narrative, you invite them into your peace. And if they can't meet you there, you let them go, not from anger, but from alignment, because you finally know what you're no longer willing to trade just to be chosen. This is where the game ends. This is where your old identity dissolves, where the need to be understood fades, where the hunger for intensity transforms into a devotion to depth. And in that devotion, the field around you changes. You no longer attract what you once did, because you're no longer who you once were. The narcissist sees this shift, and they don't know what to do with it. Their strategies fail. Their power dissolves. So what they needed was your unconscious participation. And now your consciousness is active, awake, unavailable to the old programs. You've remembered who you are, and that memory isn't just intellectual. It's energetic. It radiates from your presence. It speaks before you do. It guides you without needing to convince anyone. It leads you back to the only place where real transformation happens within, where the stillness is strong, where the boundaries are rooted in love, where the old patterns die, your truth begins. Asterisk. There comes a point in the evolution of consciousness when we stop asking, how can I get this person to treat me better? And begin to ask a more powerful question. Why have I allowed this frequency into my field? And that is the moment when we begin to understand the sacred role of energetic detachment. Not detachment as in withdrawal or avoidance, but as the highest form of boundary. Energetic detachment is not about ignoring people. It's about refusing to participate in the cycles that keep you fragmented. It's about staying present in your own body, anchored in your own truth, even when someone else is trying to pull you into the old emotional programs that once dictated your reactions. Narcissists do not need to control your actions to control your energy. They only need your unconscious agreement to stay emotionally entangled with them. Every time you over-explain, over-apologize, or override your own needs to keep the peace, you are not setting a boundary. You are leaking energy, and when your energy is scattered like that, you become easier to hook. Not because you're weak, but because your body is still conditioned to confuse intensity with love and survival with connection. The healing begins when you bring that pattern to light. There's a reason people stay entangled in toxic dynamics long after they understand them. The body is still addicted to the emotional chemistry of the past. The brain is still wired to seek familiarity, even if that familiarity causes pain. Energetic detachment disrupts this loop. It gives the nervous system a chance to recalibrate. But in the beginning, it doesn't feel like peace. It feels like emptiness. It feels like loss. Because the part of you that once derived identity from being needed, from being chosen, from being everything to someone else, is being asked to let go. And that's why most people return to the cycle. Not because they don't know better, but because their biology hasn't yet caught up with their awareness. To detach energetically is to reprogram your entire system. It is to become so rooted in self-awareness, so coherent in your own frequency, that you can stand in the presence of chaos and not absorb it. You could sit across from someone who used to trigger every wound inside you and feel nothing but clarity, not because you're cold, it's because you're free. This kind of detachment sends a shockwave through the narcissistic dynamic. Narcissists are not threatened by anger or tears or confrontation. Those reactions feed their narrative. They confirm that they still hold emotional power over you. What terrifies them is your neutrality, your calm, your grounded silence, your refusal to give your energy where it's not honored, because in that refusal, you're no longer affirming the false version of reality. They try to impose on you. Energetic detachment is the ultimate reset button. It doesn't just protect you. It rewrites the subconscious contract. It breaks the agreement you made to overextend yourself to be loved. And when that agreement dissolves, so does the attraction to people who demand that kind of sacrifice. You stop craving their validation. You stop fantasizing about closure. You stop rehearsing old conversations in your mind because your energy has returned home. The more you practice this detachment, the more you begin to notice something extraordinary. Your intuition sharpens, your body relaxes, your thoughts become clearer. You no longer feel like you're swimming upstream in every interaction. The people who once had a hold on you start to fade, not just physically, but vibrationally. It's not that you forget them, it's that they no longer exist in the same frequency. You've shifted timelines, you've exited the emotional program, and from that space, you begin to attract differently. Not because you're trying to manifest something, but because your new baseline is self-respect. Your new normal is peace. You no longer bond over trauma. You no longer seek out people who need fixing just to avoid fixing yourself. You no longer apologize for your boundaries. You begin to realize that your energy is not a resource for others to consume. It is a sacred force that shapes your reality. This doesn't mean you never get triggered again. Healing is not about becoming invincible. It's about becoming aware faster. It's about catching the old pattern the moment it arises and choosing differently. And that choice happens in the body before it happens in the mind. Your breath and your posture. In your ability to pause and observe instead of react and collapse. There will be moments when the old self resurfaces. When you want to reach out, when you want to explain yourself, when you want to rescue someone who's spiraling just to soothe your own discomfort. But that is when you return to your power. Not by suppressing the emotion, but by witnessing it, by honoring the part of you that once thought love meant sacrifice. And then by reminding yourself that safety no longer lives in being chosen by them. It lives in choosing yourself over and over again. Energetic detachment is an act of devotion, not to separation, but to wholeness. It is how you reclaim your nervous system from the past. How you deprogram the belief that chaos is necessary for connection. How you learn to relate without losing yourself. And the more you embody this detachment, the more your reality begins to reflect it. Relationships become easier. Conversations become clearer. Decisions become more aligned. Because you are no longer operating from fear. You are operating from coherence. In this coherence, the narcissist cannot thrive. They need confusion. They need you to question yourself. They need your energy to be inconsistent so they can keep you off balance. But your detachment dissolves. Their leverage, it ends the performance. It brings light to the places where manipulation used to live. It gives you the one thing you've been seeking all along, sovereignty. That sovereignty is not aggressive. It doesn't need to prove anything. It simply is. It's the quiet strength that allows you to walk away without burning bridges. It's the clarity that lets you say no without guilt. It's the peace that comes from knowing your value is no longer on trial. It's the freedom that lives on the other side of reactivity. You begin to realize that you were never broken, or never too much. You were simply trained to believe that love must be earned through effort, and detachment rewires that belief. It teaches you that love, real love, honors your presence. It doesn't require your exhaustion. It meets you where you are, not where your trauma once placed you. And in that knowing, you evolve. You rise. You shift from surviving relationships to creating them. From being chosen to choosing. From chasing safety to becoming it. And the narcissist who once fed on your doubt now fades into the background of a story you no longer need to tell. Because the truth is, you have remembered. Your worth, and your energy now reflects it. Every time you reclaim a part of yourself that you gave away for love, for approval, for peace that was never real, you send a signal into the quantum field that you are no longer available for anything less than truth. You are not just healing. You are reprogramming. And not only are you reprogramming your brain, your nervous system, your emotional responses, you're reprogramming the entire field of manipulation that once held you hostage. The patterns we repeat in relationships are not random. They are codes, deep-rooted imprints that live in the subconscious, shaped by childhood, reinforced by trauma, and held in place by unprocessed emotion. And until those patterns are brought into awareness, we keep calling them destiny. We keep thinking that narcissists find us, that we just have bad luck, that love always feels like struggle. But the truth is, you weren't attracting narcissists because you were weak. You were attracting them because your field was still wired for codependency, because your emotional body was still craving resolution from a story you never got to finish. And the narcissist fits perfectly into that unresolved script. But when you start doing the work, when you choose self-awareness over self-abandonment, when you begin showing up for your inner child, regulating your nervous system, observing your thoughts, instead of believing them, you begin to change. You begin to see the pattern. And more importantly, you begin to step outside of it. That moment when you step out is not just personal. It is vibrational. It's not just about feeling better. It's about becoming someone different. Someone who no longer reacts from the same emotional triggers. Someone who no longer feels the need to prove their worth through loyalty to dysfunction. Someone who has let go of the belief that love must be earned through sacrifice. And when that shift happens, it's not subtle. It changes everything. You start to respond differently. The old emotional hooks no longer grab you. The old cycles start to dissolve. The narcissist who once had access to your energy can no longer find an entry point. Not because they've changed, because you have. Because your energy is no longer programmed for their survival. Narcissists need resonance. They need an emotional match. Your guilt matches their blame. Your self-doubt matches their control. Your over-responsibility matches their avoidance. But when you clear those programs from your system, and you no longer meet them at the emotional frequency they depend on, the connection breaks. Not with drama, but with quiet clarity. You are not rejecting them. You're releasing the version of yourself who believed you needed to stay. The version of you who thought love meant holding pain. That version lived in survival. That version was trying to avoid abandonment. But the new you, the one who has come back to self, doesn't chase peace through people anymore. You've learned how to create it from within, and in that place, your field begins to stabilize. Your body softens. Your thoughts become still. You're no longer in fight or flight. You are no longer bracing for the next emotional blow. You are grounded. You are coherent. You are safe inside yourself. And in that safety, your electromagnetic field starts broadcasting something new. It says, I am whole. I am not looking to be rescued. I am not performing for love. I am not available for manipulation disguised as intimacy. This field is powerful. It is intelligent. It communicates with the world around you. You don't have to say a word. Your energy says it for you. People feel the shift. Some will honor it. Others will challenge it, but it won't matter. Because when you have embodied the shift, no one else's chaos can pull you back into your old self. You'll begin to notice how much easier life becomes. Not because everything outside of you is perfect, but because you are no longer emotionally fused with everything around you. You've created space. Space to breathe, to observe, to choose. And that space is sacred. That space is freedom. This is the reward of the inner work. Not applause, not validation, but sovereignty, peace, presence. And in that presence, the manipulation has nowhere to land. You are no longer hooked by praise or paralyzed by criticism. You don't swing between guilt and resentment. You simply know who you are, and you know what you're no longer willing to participate in, and this is how you reprogram the field. It's not by fighting the narcissist, not by trying to wake them up, but by waking yourself up, by becoming the one who no longer reacts, the one who no longer needs to be chosen. The one who no longer hands their power away in the name of love. It's subtle, but it's revolutionary. You break the chain. You stop the inheritance. You choose to end the cycle, not just for yourself, but for every generation before you that normalized pain as the price of connection. And every generation after you that will now have a model for what self-respect actually looks like, because you're no longer in the story. You're watching it from the outside. You're observing the script and deciding whether you want to keep acting in it. And when you put down the role, when you step off that stage, the whole production starts to unravel. You're the energy, holding it all together, and now your energy is aligned with truth. That truth doesn't need defending. It doesn't seek revenge, doesn't prove its worth. It simply lives. It breathes. It creates new patterns. And that creation is your greatest power. Because the moment you say, "This ends with me," the universe listens. Your body responds. Your field expands. You are no longer trapped in an emotional loop. You are writing a new code. Every time you choose integrity over performance, peace over chaos, alignment over addiction, you imprint that code into the field, and eventually people begin to meet you there. It's not because you forced them to change, but because you've changed. Because your energy is no longer willing to host the old patterns. And in that moment, you become the example, the permission slip. The one who broke free, not by fighting, but by becoming. And that is what every manipulative system fears. Someone who no longer fuels it. Someone who no longer explains themselves. Someone who no longer stays where their spirit is shrinking. Someone who remembers that healing is not becoming someone new. It's returning to who you were before the world taught you to forget. And now, you remember asterisk. So here you are, standing on the other side of something that once consumed you. No longer searching for answers in someone else's silence. No longer begging for breadcrumbs of validation from someone who only ever saw your openness as a resource to exploit. You've done something few ever do. You've stepped out of the pattern. You've interrupted the programming. You've chosen consciousness over comfort. That is not just healing. That is liberation. You didn't win by becoming louder, harsher, or more guarded. You won by becoming still. By reclaiming your energy. By choosing not to be available for emotional manipulation. You didn't need to prove your worth to anyone. You needed only to recognize that your energy, your presence, your love is sacred, and not everyone deserves access to it, especially those who need to control it in order to feel powerful. Narcissists fear that, fear the emotionally unavailable, not because you're cold, but because you're contained. They fear your silence not because it's punishment, but because it's power. They fear your peace because it exposes the chaos they thrive in. And most of all, they fear your awakening, because once you wake up, once you see the game for what it is, you no longer play it. You are no longer driven by the need to be chosen. You choose yourself now. You are no longer seduced by intensity. You seek depth. You are no longer holding on to relationships that force you to abandon your truth. You are building connections that honor it. You've broken the cycle not by fixing anyone else, but by finally facing yourself. And in that facing, you have rewired your emotional reality. You've shifted the electromagnetic signature you carry. And now, everything that meets you must match that new frequency, or it falls away. This is what it means to transcend. To move beyond surviving into a state of creating. You're not just healing the past. You are building the future. And you are no longer a victim of your emotional patterns. You are a conscious creator of your energetic field. And in that field, manipulation cannot live. In that field, love is not something you chase. It's something you embody. So if you've ever doubted your progress, look at who you are becoming. Look at how you hold your boundaries without guilt. Look at how you no longer explain your worth. Look at how you've stopped calling chaos love. That is your evidence, as your proof. You have risen, quietly, powerfully, and now you walk differently, think differently, love differently. Not because of what happened to you, but because of what you chose to do with it. That choice is your revolution. That choice is your freedom. That choice is who you truly are.